Hello again, YouTube. This is Peter with you once again, and I'm here to talk about the recent unpleasant and upsetting event in American history. That is, of course, the Cubs winning the World Series. No, I'm joking. Of course, I'm talking about the election. How could I not? Trust me, I would rather be talking about just about anything else. But here we are, President-elect Trump. So right now, I offer this as the moment for Trump supporters to gloat a little bit. Go ahead. Honestly, hearing Trump supporters gloating would be a refreshing change of pace from how insufferable the Bernie or Bust crowd has been recently. I would rather hear Trump supporters at this point. But here's the thing, though. Enjoy this moment, because I don't think it's going to last. Now, I've learned my lesson about making political predictions, but in this case, I feel reasonably confident. And I feel confident in saying that Donald Trump is going to let down, and in many cases betray, many of the people who so adamantly supported him. Partially because they seem to believe that he's going to be now the King of America and can just wave his magic president wand and make all these sweeping changes that will make America great again. That, of course, is not the way our government works. Also, because they apparently do not see what sort of person Trump actually is, and he will sell them out the moment it's convenient for him. In fact, that process has already begun. Now, where to even begin with this election? I think I'm going to save the finger pointing for another video. So let's just move on from that. But on election night, as I was unexpecting and unprepared for what happened, I found myself in damage control mode. So I sat there trying to logically parse out what were things that Donald Trump said where he was just talking out his ass. What will he actually do? What will he do in half measures to appease his supporters? And what will he try but fail to do? Now, I'm not going to go over all the different things that I thought of in my head. But as I thought through all of these different things, it became clear to me even then that his future prospects for a second term and for even making his supporters happy in the relatively short term don't really look all that great. And here's why. For one, as I already alluded to earlier, Trump is the quintessential example of what I like to call the King of America syndrome. I made a video on this years ago, before Trump even announced his presidency. Somebody who comes along, makes grandiose promises that they can't really even deliver on, people get hyped up about it, and then disappointment follows. You saw quite a bit of disillusionment amongst liberals with Obama. I think the disillusionment and sense of betrayal from Trump supporters within the next few years is going to be very significant. Now, given the fact that he lost the popular vote and barely won the Electoral College because of weak turnout, the liberal motivation to retake the White House in 4 years is probably going to be very strong, whereas Trump has pretty much peaked in terms of popularity, because now there will be the reality of a Donald Trump presidency to compare all of his talk and all of his rhetoric to. This is part of the reason that he was able to garner so much enthusiasm and support from certain people. I know that everyone keeps going on and on about the most outrageous things that he said, but there's more to it than that, and I'll come back to that in a second. So he has pretty much gotten into office making grandiose promises, having never held an electoral office in his life, nothing to compare it to. Now there's going to be something to compare it to. Now his words will actually ring hollow when he doesn't live up to what he promises. He will be just another politician. He will be the establishment. In other words, it's pretty much a trick that's only going to work once. Now, to be clear, I don't take what I've just said to be any kind of certainty. If this election has taught me anything, is that I should not take anything as certainty in politics, and I especially should not underestimate somebody like Donald Trump. However, I was surprised how quickly he has started to backpedal on his promises. And the goal of the Trump administration and the right-wing media over the next 4 years going into his re-election is going to be to pivot from 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, to their new slogan, 4 legs good, 2 legs better. No, I'm sorry, was that a coastal elitist literary reference? I shouldn't have done that. I'll save the who's really out of touch rant for yet another video. But going back to the election and my surprise and dismay at the results, honestly, although I was shocked and surprised, I did not ask myself why. Why did this happen? Probably because I've read too many books about the rise of authoritarian movements, too many books written by Chris Hedges that talked about the sort of despair within rural Rust Belt America that everyone is now going on about. He was writing about years ago and talked about in his book American Fascists, for example, as well as Empire of Illusion. I thought of the subtitle of that book in light of the election, because the subtitle of his book, Empire of Illusion, is the decline of literacy and the rise of spectacle. And what could be more symbolic of the rise of spectacle than the election of Donald Trump as president, a reality television star? But more than just my personal interest in, books by Hannah Arendt and other writers like that, I did something that I feel that a lot of liberals probably didn't do in the lead up to this election. Many of them were quite content to hear the outrageous soundbite version of Donald Trump that they heard through the media, and didn't take the time fortifying their stomach enough to actually listen to what he said. And in the months leading up to the election, once he became the nominee and it was the general election, I started actually watching speeches that he gave. Much has been made of his lack of intelligence and how poorly he speaks and can't form a coherent sentence, and there's some of that in there. But at some point along the way, either through his own intelligence, which is debatable, or through skilled stage management, he learned exactly the right buttons to push. This is what I think a lot of liberals don't understand in their panic over, the racists have won, the xenophobic. Yes, that is obviously a part of his support. Even just yesterday, as I was looking in my recommended video section on YouTube, I saw what was obviously a pro-Trump video. I clicked on the person's channel, and lo and behold, their like section was Trump videos and Nazi videos. Historical archival footage where it's look how glamorous and cool the Nazis were. So obviously that element of his support is real. But it really does not fully explain why the millions of other people who voted for him did so. And it would be an analysis and a video in and of itself to go into that. But basically what it boils down to is this. You have problems on people's minds not being addressed by the political establishment. I know this part's a cliche. But he was able to quite skillfully take an idea which, under close scrutiny by college-educated intellectuals with their degrees in economics, would say is a bad idea. But it sounds good to average Joe and average Susie out there in middle America, and spin it so that people believed that the only reason that politicians hadn't acted on this obviously brilliant idea was that they were corrupt and they didn't have the will to do so, and not that the ideas themselves were just bad. And people ate it up. Because, of course, the world is complex, but obviously the solutions are simple. There's no nuance to anything. Just build a wall. That will stop all illegal immigration. It's simple. Build the wall. Build the wall. Let's just chant it over and over and over. And that's just one example. You can go through, I think a lot of people truly underestimated how skillfully he played all of these different factors against each other. Like, hold on a second. I made a diagram. I found myself in the weeks before the election, like, making a diagram of how he plays all these different things off of each other. You know? Common sense ideas, outsider. Like, it's a whole matrix of playing one thing off of another to make himself seem like he is the only one who's enough of an outsider, who has the political will, who has the capability to act out these ideas. And a lot of people do feel put off by the political establishment, who won't just do the common sense thing because they're too corrupt. But even acknowledging the skill of Trump's political theater, throughout this election, I've thought about that scene in Batman Returns where the Penguin, who had been running for the mayor of Gotham, says to Batman, "You gotta admit, I played this stinking city like a harp from hell." Because I think that's the reality of Trump. I think that these grandiose promises that he's made, assuming he had any intention of delivering on them to begin with, are likely at best going to see a watered down version. And what's actually going to happen is that we're going to get more of the same old Republican policies that we saw under Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. And how'd that work out for the white working class in the Rust Belt? Did Ronald Reagan save them? No. Much has been made in this election about how honest Trump is, how he speaks the truth without being hampered by political correctness. So indulge me for a moment as I give you my truth as a college-educated, coastal, elitist liberal. But as I do so, understand this. Before I went to college, I was a working class white person, you know, the very sort of person they keep going on and on about, even though that's not really the tax bracket that formed the core of Trump support. I also know what it's like to be from rural, economically depressed America. I grew up in a conservative family of Republicans, and I understand that worldview. So let me first say this. It wasn't going to college, the liberal indoctrination factory, that gave me my liberal worldview. It was being a working class person under a Republican administration and seeing the realities of Republican policy and its complete and utter failure to help working class people. It wasn't college that made me liberal. Okay? Now, let's talk about, first, this whole bringing manufacturing jobs back to America. That's not likely to happen. You have to understand why in the post-war period of World War II, I know this is history and that garbage you learn in college and too long did not read. But after World War II, America was way ahead of the pack because the rest of the world had either not industrially developed or had been devastated by the war. So people keep talking about China. Look what happened to China in World War II. They were invaded by Japan. And then, shortly after World War II, they went through a communist revolution. It wasn't until Richard Nixon visited China in the 70s, early 70s, and started trade with China. But what you see when you look at U.S. manufacturing is that over the last 70 years, since the end of World War II, it slowly declined. And then, yes, during NAFTA, it did start to sharply decline. Because here's the thing. The rest of the world caught up. And also automation. Robots are taking your jobs. And so what to do with that? Well, first of all, understand that business, not the political establishment. No, I shouldn't say that. Yes, the political establishment, because it's the business and the rich that fund the campaigns of the political establishment. It's business that wants cheap Chinese goods. I mean, really, why would you pay an American $15 an hour to manufacture iPhones when you can pay somebody in Southeast Asia a fraction of that? Now, of course, there are reasons why certain companies do manufacture within the United States. It's not always the cheapest thing to build in China because, remember, it's on the other side of the largest ocean on the planet. But by and large, it's just more profitable for business to manufacture with cheap foreign labor overseas. That's why the American worker is losing. All this shenanigans about how we're getting screwed over in trade deals, this is just to confound the reality of what Marxists like to prattle on about as being capitalism. Okay? Businesses, by and large, want to pay as few people as possible, as little as possible, to do as much as possible to maximize their own profits. This is why when you go to a Walmart, there's hardly any cashiers and a bunch of self-checkouts. It's not because they can't afford to hire more cashiers. The store might be making $100 million a year. That doesn't matter. That's money. Labor is an expense to them. Massive turnover in their business. If it's a menial job, they don't care. And here's the thing. The age of the high-paid person with no skills, no education, is pretty much over. And this idea that what liberals should have done was pander to the people who are stuck culturally and economically in the 20th century, it's kind of hard to do that with any sort of integrity. So it takes somebody like Donald Trump, who has no real integrity, to pander to those sorts of people. Okay? Now that we've discussed why high-paying manufacturing jobs really aren't going to come back into vogue in any major way, can we talk about how massively entitled it is to think that the U.S. economy should be completely bent and contorted through government intervention? Make no mistake, government intervention, so that somebody who has no education and no skills can make a decent wage? Well, of course, there are other ways to do that. You could demand higher minimum wage. You could unionize and fight for higher wages. But Republicans have systematically trained people to believe that those are terrible ideas by playing workers off against each other. So someone with a little bit of skill who has a difficult job, like a paramedic, how dare somebody flipping burgers ask for more money because so-and-so doing this slightly harder, slightly more skilled job doesn't make that much money, so how dare you? You know, these entitled people think they're worth more money for flipping burgers. No, thinking that we're going to completely transform the American economy and put massive tariffs on foreign goods so that you can make $40,000 a year, making widgets in a factory with only a high school education, that is massively entitled. All right? It sucks. Being poor sucks. But Republicans have convinced you that the government shouldn't do anything to help you. No sort of social safety net, no health care, that's all socialist garbage. They've convinced you of that. They've convinced you that you don't need unions, that you don't need higher wages. And the reality is that Trump pretty much stands alone in his protectionist in his protectionist views of economics. Because the rest of the Republican establishment is all for free trade because it enriches the people who fund their campaigns. Tax cuts help the rich. These are the realities. Okay? Yes, being working class sucks. You got it bad. But Republican policies don't help you. And the Republican establishment is not going to enact the sorts of changes that Donald Trump says he's going to enact. But then again, maybe I'm wasting my time ranting about all of this because apparently from the actual data, it doesn't seem like the average Trump voter really is working class. That they're doing reasonably well and would benefit from tax breaks. Not as much as somebody in the income bracket of someone like Donald Trump would, but this white working class thing. Do I think that liberals have basically failed in bringing around working class voters to the understanding that Republican policies don't benefit them? Certainly. I'll make the finger pointing video soon enough. But here's my main point. The establishment is still very much in control. And the establishment benefits from things like free trade. So Donald Trump, he's president-elect, and he goes to meet the Republican head of the Senate, and he's like, I think we should have term limits. And he's like, nah, I don't think we're going to be, that's not going to be on the agenda, Mr. Trump. So much for drain the swamp. Oh, and by the way, it's not really going to be a wall. It's more going to be like a fence, but that's a whole other story. Yes, Donald Trump might get through a few of his more wacky ideas, but he has surrounded himself with the establishment. It will be the establishment in Congress and in the Senate who actually pass the laws. And we're going to get more business as usual from Republicans. And once people start to realize that these Republican policies that were tried under Reagan, they were tried under Bush Sr., they were tried under Bush Jr., once they realize that they don't actually help working class people, the betrayal is going to set in. This disillusionment is going to set in. And liberals should probably try and step up to the plate and say, hey, I know that they've convinced you that it's not in your interest to fight for higher wages, to fight for things like healthcare, but it actually is in your interest. And even after all this ranting, I have only begun to scratch the surface of most of these issues. I haven't even talked about illegal immigration and Muslims and how that is a scapegoat to distract Republican voters from the fact that the Republican policies are actually in service of their corporate masters. And I wish I could say that the Democratic Party was so much better on that point, but the reality is that they're not. But again, that would have to come in a different finger-pointing video. Illegal immigrants? Okay, these are people who are by and large doing jobs that 60 years ago a hobo would have done. They're taking your job. But all of this shenanigans about the white working class support for Trump, you're all being played. That's my point. You are all being played. And when you realize that, you will be disillusioned and you will feel betrayed. And I will try not to gloat. And if I may end this with a quote from Game of Thrones, I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. Oh, hello there, YouTube viewer. You are apparently still watching this video. This is going to be the Marvel-style end credits scene. I want to say, amongst other things, that I will be expanding upon what's going on in this video in future videos and getting into all the things that I didn't talk about. But at the same time, lots has already been said, so I want to recommend my old friend ContraPoints video, in which he concisely summarizes and talks about quite a lot that's going on with this election. I thought it was an excellent video. Also, I want to give a shout out to Zonstar, who made a good point about all these people talking about SJWs in the election, and the fact that that's not really there in the voting data. It's not on the list of things that matter. But I'll talk more about that in my finger pointing video and what I think about whether or not liberals need a clean house of SJWs and where they seem to fit into this whole election. But that's all to come. So for now, have a good whatever time it is.